Welcome to the Stumbling Spirit, contemplations on the path of resilience. Whether you realize it or not, you are resilient. It's your birthright. As you take in your next breath, know this truth. It's not only about your capacity to overcome difficult situations, but it's about your courage to do the necessary work to heal, learn, grow, and move forward. What you gain is invaluable wisdom. And it's through these hard stumbles in life that we often discover a new purpose that aligns with our spirit. My name is Fabio da Silva Fernandez, Reiki Master, Mindfulness Coach, and Mystical Explorer. Join me weekly as the Stumbling Spirit podcast highlights the lives of extraordinary people like you, sharing transformative stories and beneficial practices of resilience to guide you on your wellness journey. For 18 years, Nancy Horvath has been a successful fundraiser, raising millions of dollars for some of the most prominent healthcare organizations in Canada to help improve the lives and health outcomes of patients. In 2020, at the beginning of the pandemic, Nancy became a patient herself, initially diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer, followed by pancreatic cancer. Now disease-free, Nancy is here to share her powerful story and healing journey that spanned the big city of Toronto to one of the most remote ends of Canada, Fogo Island. It's a pleasure to welcome to the show, mother of 4 and dear friend, Nancy Horvath. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Fabio. So nice to be here.
I really should start by saying I'm so happy that you're cancer-free.
Me too. And I think every day I just keep believing that I'm going to stay cancer-free.
100%. Let's go back to the period just before you were diagnosed. You were 38 years old. COVID-19 had just started. You lived in Toronto with your wife, Leanne, and your 2 young kids, and a third was on the way. All the while, you worked as director of major gifts at Sick Kids Foundation in Toronto. Can you describe what was happening in your life at that time in the lead up to your diagnosis?
I feel like we were all living in a bit of chaos. The world had felt like it was sort of shifting on its axis. When I think back to those early days and weeks and months, nobody really knew where things were going to be, how things were going to end, when things were going to end. Our lives had been completely flipped for us. That meant we were in our apartment with 2 small children. Toronto had closed all of the green spaces, so we couldn't even use outdoor space, really. I think for my colleagues and team, everybody was just going through their own journey. So I think we were really fortunate to try to find a bit of balance in that. And we ended up leaving the city. And it was so great because we were just in a cabin in the woods by ourselves in nature. And, of course, I think we were adapting work-wise to be working remotely. So everything was shifting. We were finding new ways of working. We were trying to keep connected to people. We were going through our own journeys and, for some people, traumas of the pandemic, and watching around the world as people were losing their lives to this virus that we didn't really know anything about at that time.
What, if any, signs were you physically noticing or feeling that there was maybe something amiss in the lead up to your diagnosis?
Nothing. I think that was part of why it was so shocking. Yes. But life was busy. Of course, we had 2 small little people in our life. I probably wasn't doing as many of my regular breast exams as I might have been doing, but I found a lump in my breast and thankfully have an incredible family doctor who was very responsive. I found it in late one night. I tried not to panic. Of course, I read the whole internet and then I still tried not to panic. I remember having this distinct moment, should I wake Leanne up at 2 a.m? And I was like, no, because she's pregnant, third baby, we're in the pandemic, the kids, there's just so much energy needed for our days right now. It's okay. There's nothing she can do right now. I will tell her in the morning. But I wrote an email to my family doctor. And I also did not send it because I also was like, I don't need to send her a panicked email at 2 o'clock in the morning. in the morning, when Leanne woke up, I was like, hey, like, can you feel this? This feels kind of weird to me. And she was like, yeah, that does. And so I had her read the email that I was going to send to my doctor. And my doctor responded really, really promptly and called me within hours of my email. And she's like, I think we should get you in for some scans. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to be back in Toronto in a few weeks. And so like that would work. She's like, we might want to get you in a little bit sooner. And so that was a Sunday night. If anybody's ever experienced a major health crisis, I feel like we remember the dates. They're emblazoned in our brains forever. It was June 14th of 2020. And on June 19th, I was in getting scans, a mammogram and an ultrasound. And then they were very gracious and asked me, do you have some extra time to stay for some biopsies? And I was like, oh, this is not good. It's funny. I kind of knew that I was going to have breast cancer. And then when they started biopsying my lymph nodes, I was like, oh, yeah, this is bad. And I'm not a good person with needles. So that was a really hard moment. And nobody tells you actually how painful a biopsy is going to be. So for anybody that's listening that has had a biopsy, I feel you. It is not pleasant, but I had a great team. And I was also really grateful to have access to my health records because, of course, they were sending the biopsies for pathology. And we had a follow-up appointment a couple of days later with my family doctor to talk through the results. But we got the results of my lymph node pathology first, which said that it was suspected carcinoma from the breast. We didn't find out the results of my actual breast biopsy until we had the meeting with my doctor, but Leanne and I had kind of already mentally prepared, and in some ways we actually felt like that was really positive for us. We were able to do a little bit of research and come to the conversation with a ton of questions that I don't think we would have had because we'd already sort of digested a little bit of the initial diagnosis. I remember my doctor apologizing that we had found out through the online portal. And I was like, no, for us, it actually was a benefit because it meant that we weren't just sitting in that meeting and having to digest. It was a phone call. And we actually had a very productive conversation and things moved very, very quickly from that stage. And I had more tests than I can even remember, thankfully, and met with a breast surgeon, met with an oncologist, and sort of the plan was made for my course of treatment. And, I had to tell my team. And in the end, we wrapped up my work in about 3 days. And I was so grateful for such an incredible team. I was working at Sick Kids Foundation at the time. It was just amazing. Everybody was really, really supportive and understood that we just needed to focus on my health. And within a month of me originally finding the lump in my breast, I was starting chemotherapy on July 14th of 2020, which was also a wild and weird experience in COVID because nobody could be with you at any of your appointments. And I have others in my life who had gone through chemotherapy and, people would go and sit with them for the journey of that time. And in some ways it made things easier and in some ways it made things harder. But yeah, it was kind of a wild journey.
I don't know this about breast cancer, but is it hereditary?
It can be. And because I was young, my oncology team did have me go through all of the genetic testing, for the genes that today we know are really linked to breast cancer. But I didn't have any in the genetic testing. There weren't any that came back that I was predisposed to. But there hasn't been a lot of cancer in my family. And I also learned through this journey, for the majority of people that have breast cancer, they're older. The average age of breast cancer, I think, is like 62 or 63. I was 38 and my oncology team specialized in cancer in women under 40, which was really, really powerful and helpful to have that sort of lens. But only about 5% of breast cancer patients are under the age of 40. So you're already sort of in a bit of more rare category to begin with.
I don't have any idea about what it's like to receive a cancer diagnosis, but I do know what it's like to get the news that a friend or a loved one like you has gotten a cancer diagnosis. What can you share about what you and your family went through when you were initially diagnosed?
We went through all the emotions, as you can imagine. I didn't know this, and maybe this isn't the same for every cancer, but you also don't really know staging until you have pathology and like pretty advanced pathology. The biopsy was not going to give us the full staging. So, people would ask like, well, what stage is it? And you're like, I don't know. And I'm actually not going to maybe know until in my case, I have a mastectomy. Like that's really real. And that was going to be months and months away. You go through the whole range of, am I going to die? What if I die? What does that mean for our family? You end up having a lot of moments of crying, hopefully some moments of laughter, and also really deep conversations, I think, that most people don't have. Thankfully, they don't have to have. But I think for Leanne and I, that made us stronger, and it made us really have a moment of where do we want to be? What do we want to be doing? How do we want to be living our life? And that extended throughout the journey. It wasn't all at the beginning, but at the beginning, there was a lot of emotions. And then you have to tell people. There's a lot of shitty feelings, to be honest, at the beginning. And I think part of it is because you just don't know what's next. I think people often feel more comfortable when they have some level of control in any situation. And I think a cancer diagnosis sort of throws you into this vortex of total lack of control. You don't have control in any of the real decisions that are being made around your healthcare. Of course, you do in consultation with your medical team, but there's going to be things that are going to happen that is the right protocol and the right treatment. And, that your medical team is hopeful will help make you survive this cancer. It's a roller coaster of emotions, and that doesn't necessarily end for a long time because you still are in spaces of unknown. Going through that also while the world was going through a roller coaster of emotions, in some ways, COVID in our lives really took a back seat, obviously, but we were going through a different range of emotions than kind of the rest of the world, it felt like at the time.
Did you tell your kids right away? You had two very young kids at the time. Did you share this news with them right away?
I can't remember exactly when we shared the news with them. We found some great resources about how to, talk to your kids about cancer. And we shared in some ways because kids are so perceptive. We knew that they would know something was off, something was different. We did start to share early on because our life was going to change quite dramatically. My treatment was going to be very aggressive. There were going to be physically things that they would see. Like my medical team said, like, you're going to lose your hair by the time you're in your second round of chemo. The point from my diagnosis to my treatment beginning was only a month. So there were a lot of things that needed to kind of happen. We made a bit of a celebration of that. We went and got this incredible referral from my oncology team to an amazing woman who makes wigs out of your hair. So we took a bottle of bubbly, and a friend and Leanne joined me, and I got my hair all cut off and they made a wig out of it, not in the moment. And then I went actually to my hairstylist and we cut off the rest of the hair. And we did all of the 80s lesbian punk hairstylists as my hair was coming off, which, again, we just needed to find some levity in this really unfortunate, shitty space that we were in. I don't know that I would ever relive any of those haircuts, but it was a fun moment at a time that was really scary.
I mentioned in the intro that you were diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. What was your prognosis at that time?
They didn't really give me a prognosis. They really said, your cancer is aggressive. My cancer was driven by 2 different hormones. My cancer was not just estrogen driven, but it was also HER2 positive. Because I was young, because my cancer had 2 different hormones driving it, they were going to be very aggressive with my treatment. And so that's why for some people, they don't have this happen, but I had my chemotherapy first. They wanted to start the treatment as soon as possible. Then I had surgery followed by radiation. And I was on some targeted therapies and I was on some chemotherapies my chemotherapy was a pretty short period of time, actually, in the grand scheme of things, but I had some targeted therapies for much longer. And it was definitely a journey. I think that the team, when you have a cancer like this, it could not be positive. And I was really lucky in many ways. Here, I have spent a good portion of my career raising money to advance medical research in children and in adults. And I was benefiting from that because there was a new drug that could really target HER2 positive breast cancer that I was able to have that did not exist 5 years prior. It was in combination with another really good drug that targets HER2, which is called Herceptin. It was just this moment where I acknowledged that 5 years earlier, if I had been diagnosed, I may also have had a different outcome. So I think the team was very focused on like, let's just kill this cancer and we're going to throw everything at you. And because you're young, we're going to give you higher doses than we might give somebody else. And we're just going to do everything we possibly can to make sure that this cancer doesn't continue to live in your body.
Did you find it an advantage working in healthcare to be able to get the care that you deserved?
I don't think I had any advantages in terms of access, to healthcare, but what I appreciated and what I saw as a huge privilege was because I had been working in the healthcare space for a long time, I understood some of the lingo, some of the words. Of course, I still needed to use a dictionary for a lot of the things that would come up. But, I think I had a broader sense of also how families cope in situations like this, having worked with so many different families in my time at Sick Kids who were going through not just cancer but lots of different health care needs. For me, I did a ton of reading and really threw myself into trying to learn as much about the cancer, but maybe even less about the cancer and more about how is it possible that at this age I have this cancer, and what could be some of the reasons that could be possible if it's not coming up as one of the main breast cancer genetic markers or something. So I think that was I tried to turn my focus a little bit to understanding more about like the ecosystem around me that could have led to me having this. And for whatever reason, I'll never forget early on in one of my first appointments, somebody saying like, don't blame yourself. And I was like, I actually don't blame myself. So I know that is something that many people really struggle with. What did I do? How did this happen to me? What could I have done differently? I never really felt that for myself, but I think that would have been a lot harder if I had, quite honestly. I sort of focused on, okay, so this thing is living and thriving in my body. So for whatever set of circumstances that is, how do I, coming out of this, make sure that cancer cannot thrive in my body? And that was really sort of the reading path and journey that I went down.
I want to go back a little bit because I think this is a really important point. So there was a moment when you needed to share your diagnosis with friends and family. What is it that you can share about just that conversation and what's important for someone with cancer to hear and what is not helpful to hear? Can you talk about the nuances in terms of that kind of conversation and maybe some of the frustrations that you encountered, or maybe some of the words of encouragement that you received? I just want to get a sense of that conversation because I would imagine that for a lot of people, that's really difficult. And sometimes what people say just doesn't land very well.
Yeah, I'm sure in the moment when I, was reaching out to people or talking to people, I think one of the things that I found really helpful was when people could just kind of commiserated with me in the misery of it. Like, this really sucks. It really sucks for you. Like, I'm just like so sorry, I don't know at the beginning if I was really able to receive positive, like, you'll be fine. You'll get through this. Look, I know all these other people who've gotten through this. For me, that wasn't necessarily motivating that early on. But I think that's also where my own headspace was. Like, I couldn't be there yet because I was just living in this moment of shock, quite honestly. I actually didn't really want to hear about all of the success stories because I might not be one of them. I didn't know. And I also acknowledge that people don't know what to say in these situations and are trying to be helpful. So it's not that I didn't receive that from a kind lens. It was just more that for me in that moment, I wasn't ready for the positives. I was more leaning into the people that were just like, this really sucks. And I think the other piece that I think a big differentiator for us in certain ways was the people that really showed up for Leanne, because of course our life still has to continue. And not only was she pregnant and expecting our third baby, but we were living in COVID. The kids had to be home. And because I was now diagnosed with cancer, even if we had thought we could send the kids back to daycare because daycares were maybe opening up, our medical team actually said you can't because the risks were just too high that they could bring something home that could delay my treatment or that I could get really sick. And again, we were still early days of COVID, quite honestly. Like, this was only the fourth month, really. in Canada that we were experiencing it. So people still just did not know what to expect. And, when we did know if people had other health things, that COVID could be more risky. I appreciated, I got some good like F cancer paraphernalia. There's a great beer company, I think somewhere in the US, that makes F cancer beer. And I didn't get to drink the beer, but I got to have the cup, and I drank a lot of things out of that cup, let me tell you. I think it was also, even as we started the journey into cancer, I enjoyed the people that would send me moments of levity. I think we really tried to focus on laughing as much as we could, because there was so much that we could have cried about. I mean, we did. We did cry about a lot of things. It was a really hard time, but I think we tried to laugh more than we cried. Somebody got me a unicorn headband at the beginning of my cancer diagnosis, which I wore with my kids. They thought it was hilarious. And then I also had a unicorn and rainbows onesie. So I was just like all of the unicorns. So my phone picture is still this unicorn rainbow. Gives me some laughs when I see it,
You mentioned Leanne, your partner Leanne, who was pregnant at the time. And we know that when women are pregnant, a lot of changes take place, hormonal changes, emotions are really on the surface. I wanted to sort of get your take on the importance of supporting a partner who is by your side when you're going through cancer, because I'm sure that there are a lot of people out there in that situation, and maybe they're not thinking about the partner. Maybe they're only thinking about the person who's going through the cancer. And so I just wanted you to offer some insights around the importance of supporting the person that is standing alongside the person who's going through cancer.
I think it's really important and powerful to support the ecosystem, whomever that is, whether that's friends or family that are really close to the person that's going through it. And there were a lot of things that people wanted to do to support Leanne and our family generally that were not possible because of COVID. For some people, that's even just, I'll come over and clean your house, or I'll come over and watch your kids. But we couldn't do that kind of stuff in the same way. So people were really gracious and gave us lots of good food, which was a really kind way, because they could kind of drop it off at her door. So that was something that was really powerful and positive. Some of my colleagues at one point came together. I was about to have a surgery, and they got like a ton of art supplies and some new fun toys for our kids. Not that they were inundating the kids with things, but it was just some things that could be used through that time that would be new and exciting. And that was really fun. And one of the things that we got were more of these magnets that our kids still to this day, that's one of the most beloved toys in our house, is all of the magnets they can build and create with. And we had some really wonderful, wonderful neighbors who spent most of their time with their kids outside. And so we felt really safe that our kids could play outside with them. And there were lots of things, that exist to support partners and family members. But I think there's more supports, honestly, for women, which was really interesting, than for men when we were reading and following some of the resources, which I think that whatever sex your partner is, they would equally need support. So I thought that was just an interesting reflection in the space that supports partners. And I think every person is different. I think one of the challenges is that people ask, like, what can I do? And that's another level of emotional labor that the person then needs to think of, like, what can you do and how can you help? And that's actually harder. So I think sometimes just doing something that doesn't involve the other person having to do a lot of other things for that to happen, those were the things that were really powerful.
You mentioned your kids a few times, of course, and you had two at the time, one on the way. I'm wondering, how did having your kids around add to your conviction to heal from this cancer?
I mean, they're pretty good motivator. Our kids at the time were 3 and 1.5. And so you have these moments where, you asked about prognosis, but I didn't know what my prognosis was. And so every day that I get to spend with these little people is going to be precious, because I don't know if I'm going to see them become 4. One of the little gifts of COVID was that our kids were home together. I think that was so special for them to have that time together, they were in daycare before and they would have been in different classes. And so they wouldn't have been spending that much time together. But that's been really, really special to watch and just see their friendship and love for each other, you know. So that was really special. And even if I couldn't always be with them, depending on how well I was or wasn't, I also got to see them grow and thrive in ways that I wouldn't have necessarily. So that felt really, really special. And they are a huge motivator to keep going because I want to see them live as long as I can see them live.
I think what's incredible about your outlook is that you seem to look at the gifts of a situation. And I don't want to sound like it's easy to do, but I guess I wanted to know how important is outlook in being able to navigate difficult circumstances?
I can only speak for me, but for me, it was very important to not let the bad thing define me. And I really wanted to focus on, okay, I have cancer. We're going to do a lot of things to treat the cancer, and hopefully they work. But I want to focus on how do I not let cancer thrive in my body? How do I make sure that cancer can't thrive in my body beyond this, beyond all of the toxic treatments that my body is going to go through, and the cutting and the burning, and, you know, which are real treatments that most people that have cancer experience. We don't know why I have it. Maybe never going to know that answer. And so I can't focus on the why. I have to focus on how to prevent it. That was my approach. I also had a number of other very close friends whose partners were diagnosed with cancer in the pandemic as well. And some of them had very different paths and some of them had very different outlooks. And it's so personal. I think it's really easy for people to say, like, you're going to beat this, or like, look at that person that has that positive outlook. Why can't you have that positive outlook? And I think everybody has to go through their own journey, because I didn't always feel positive. It wasn't like every day I woke up feeling positive. People do need to process things in their own way, and you can't compare one person to another person. So that was what worked for me and for our life and our family. And I felt like I wanted to really prioritize what was important, or what I was maybe coming to believe were the things that I felt were really important. But I'm also mindful that that's not going to be everybody's experience. And I'm not going to judge somebody else for how they go through that journey, because when you are told you have cancer, as I said, you know, it's like a roller coaster of emotions, and you can't know what day you're going to be on what part of that roller coaster or for how long. And different people find comfort in different ways. So I took a lot of comfort in the focusing on the future. And part of that might have actually been also because we had young kids. Like, I wanted to see a future. I hadn't lived my life to the fullest, I didn't feel yet. So I was really focused on that and had a lot of great people around me to support me in that journey. But it was also something that I felt like I maybe could control. Not that I needed to control everything, but it was something that I could focus on.
Thank you for mentioning the uniqueness of the cancer experience and also the nuances of emotion that take place during the journey. You mentioned that your treatment journey started in July 2020. That also coincided with your leave of absence from work. You received both chemo and radiation. I'm just wondering if you could share your experience about how your body responded to the cancer treatment.
I definitely remember, I don't remember which round of chemo it was, but I remember saying to Leanne, I can feel the lump shrinking, which felt very positive. That's not going to be the case for everybody, but I want to say it was even maybe by like my second round or something. Like, it felt early that I physically was feeling a difference. And so that is also motivating. When I approached my healthcare, of course, I had my medical team that I was working with, my oncology team, but I also brought in a ton of allied health professionals in the journey with me, and practitioners of different healing practices. A big part of that was to manage, for me, the negative side effects that I was experiencing because of the really strong medical response. And that felt really powerful. I mean, Fabio, you were part of this journey, and we were in COVID times, and every one of my chemotherapies, you were doing distance Reiki. And I also was working with a therapeutic touch practitioner. And I had a Chinese medicine doctor that I worked with that was providing acupuncture care at various times to support my treatment. And I had an incredible naturopath who was really focused on helping me through some of those really negative side effects that I seem to be experiencing a lot of. And so many of these individuals continue today to be part of my journey. So I felt like it was really holistic. And, I worked with a lymphatic drainage massage specialist in preparation for both of my surgeries and also in recovery. This was just a whole world of experts that added a lot, I thought, to my care journey, but that I really needed to piece together. And, some of them came up because other people knew of or referred. And in that, I also acknowledged that I had a lot of privilege. Not everybody would have access to building a care team. And I think everything was sort of in complement to what was happening medically. But yes, I think it was all of the pieces together.
You mentioned earlier that you had a wig made. I'm assuming that you did lose your hair. I'm wondering what other side effects did you experience?
Yes, I did lose my hair, although you don't lose like every single strand. So there was a point where I had like individual fuzz. And, I also had an incredible hairstylist who, before I lost my hair, when we did all of those haircuts, said to me, you really need to get a silk pillowcase, because even when you aren't losing your hair yet, your whole scalp is going to become so sensitive. And, nobody on my medical team ever mentioned that, even though every single person that would have been on a protocol like mine would lose their hair. Like they said to me, you will lose your hair between your first round of chemo and your second round of chemo. Like that was a 3-week period for me. So we knew it was going to happen quickly, but I couldn't have imagined how that would impact my life. Like the scratchiness, it was so painful lying on a regular pillowcase while I waited patiently for my silk pillowcases to arrive. I experienced so many things: neuropathy in my fingers and toes. So that's losing sensation, nerve sensation in your fingers and your toes, which also makes your fingernails at risk of falling out because they can get damaged very, very easily. So if you've ever been a runner and you've gotten a black toenail, or you've dropped something on a finger and you get a black fingernail, you can appreciate what that is like. But I was at risk of that in every single nail, and they were very prone. Like I damaged 2 of my nails just opening the fridge by hitting the fridge handle one day. So I had to wear bandages on every finger for a while because they were so worried about all my nails coming out, because one of the drugs really targeted those fast growing cells. And so nail damage was really common. I also had some hearing loss, which sadly I will never get back, but let me tell you, can be a real blessing when all 4 of our children now are yelling at me and talking to me about something. I'm like, I can hear you, but I can't actually hear you. I know you're talking. I hear all the noise, but I don't know what you're saying. So that is positive, maybe. I still have some nerve damage, which has meant that my life sadly does not involve many high heels anymore, which I know for lots of people medically, they're like, that's a positive thing. You shouldn't be wearing high heels anyways. But I did love a good high heel. I also got this medically induced acne, which let me tell you is like it was so terrible, and it would come on for 3 to 5 days within my chemo cycle. And there was no treatment because it was not anything I could control. It was just brought on by the drugs. You're on steroids, so you gain a ton of weight. You're having all of the GI functions that you don't want to have. I didn't thankfully have a lot of nausea. I'm sure there were more. I feel like there were a lot more. I can't remember them all, thankfully. These are the moments where I'm grateful for my brain for not allowing me to remember every single little side effect that I had, because there were many times that I would have a side effect and the medical team would be like, oh my gosh, this is like the rarest side effect. Like, of course you have this. I don't know. It was a bit wild, but the mouth stuff that people talk about, like you get like, it's like you have daggers in your mouth. You can't swallow because the drugs are targeting fast growing cells, which are cancer cells, but also everything sort of in your, like from your nostril down through your whole GI is also fast growing. So you get lots of symptoms that kind of impact your body in that way. I'm grateful to not have to think about any of those really, other than my sadly not being able to wear high heels and the hearing. I don't have a lot of residual side effects.
Thank you for sharing that though, because I had no idea about the scalp sensitivity thing, the fingernail thing, the acne thing. These are things I wouldn't have even thought of. And for anybody out there listening that is going through their own cancer journey, I think it's important for them to know. I mean, I would have never thought that you needed to change your pillows because of scalp sensitivity. So that's pretty wild just to even hear about.
The other thing that is also wild is another patient could have been on the exact same treatment protocol as I was, and they could have had a whole other range of side effects. And that was, I think, something for me that I didn't realize either, that just the range of what people are experiencing and going through is so unique. There really isn't one size fits all, and lots of people don't lose their hair, which is excellent. But if you have somebody in your life that's going to lose their hair, get them the best silk pillowcases. They will thank you forever. I still use my silk pillowcases and I love them, but they made such a difference. And it was this little thing that my hairstylist mentioned. And I actually then mentioned it to my nurse practitioner on my medical team and said, this is something that you could really easily be sharing with people. And it made a huge difference to me. And they were like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know about that. There's just got to be better ways that we share this kind of information, because there were so many people in my life that had little tidbits, whether that was from their own experience, their own careers, their own families, that I feel like I benefited from. But it was collating all of that, I think, was really hard.
Did you ever think, how ironic? I've worked in healthcare pretty much my entire career, helping to raise monies for programs and research, and now I have cancer. How did you process that?
I don't know if I had any processing of that in the moment. I mean, I did feel this real gratitude that I had been at least tangentially connected to healthcare, because I did understand certain things, whether that was process or other components of what my treatment journey would be like. But I think it was more after the fact that I felt like I maybe need some space from hospitals, actually. I don't know that I can be the fundraiser, quite honestly, that people deserve. I could have been working with families who were facing their own devastating diagnosis, and I probably would have broken down crying in front of them, having my emotions still so close to the surface. It took years for me to be able to say that I had cancer without crying. And I still get emotional about that at times, but I think it was more in the recovery stage that I thought, I have had this pleasure and this great benefit to help raise funds for treatments that are impacting people that didn't exist before. I benefited from that as a patient, but that I feel like I just needed a bit of distance from being so closely connected to hospitals. And for some people, it's the exact opposite. I just felt like I needed space.
In October of 2020, Leanne gave birth to your third baby, Adrian. And a month later, in November, you discovered that you also have pancreatic cancer. Can you share that part of your journey and how that impacted you both mentally and emotionally?
It felt really wonderful to have a new baby in the house. Although I couldn't, do any of the skin to skin stuff that I had been privileged to get to do with our other kids, because I was still in chemo, and that wouldn't have been good for the baby. But I got to love him up so much, and he was so sweet. The pancreatic cancer diagnosis in some ways was a bit shocking. I had a ton of scans at the beginning of my breast cancer diagnosis, because of course they are trying to determine if it's metastatic. We knew that it was in my breast and my lymph nodes, but had it spread to other parts of my body? They're particularly concerned with the lungs, the brain, the bones. But you get all of these wild body scans and all of this stuff. And so one of them had come up with something like there was a mass in my pancreas. But every other test that had something was then another test was booked that was urgent. And that one wasn't really booked as urgent. So I think they booked my MRI follow-up for it. Scan had probably happened at the beginning of July. And then they booked my MRI follow-up for November. And then subsequently, I had a meeting with a pancreas surgeon. So we didn't know it was cancer. We just kind of knew that there was something. And when I met with the pancreas surgeon, they sort of shared the treatment plan and that they wanted to do the surgery quite quickly because they thought it was a certain type of cancer. And my oncology team really pushed back on the timing of that surgery because it would have been quite close to when I was going to finish radiation. And they just felt like my body, the surgery for the pancreas was going to be very intense. It was called the Whipple. For those of you who have been Grey's Anatomy's fans, Dr. Bailey, this was her favorite surgery to do. If you haven't seen it, you can go back and watch it. But it was going to be a very intense surgery that reorganizes a lot of things in your body. And so my radiation team particularly felt like my body wouldn't necessarily be in a good point of recovery to undergo such an intense surgery. The pancreas team was amazing and they completely understood because my body had been through many different things in this journey. And so we delayed it a little bit to the spring, and then COVID pushed things. And so it ended up having to be in the fall, and then it got pushed again because the surgeons were really struggling to get operating time during COVID. And because it had been pushed, we had to get more scans. And so I ended up having my pancreas surgery in November. And so in some ways, that was kind of nice to have a little bit of healing time between the really intense breast cancer things and then the pancreas surgery. We didn't really even know what the cancer was. And, we had, of course, talked about whether we should do a biopsy of it and various things. But a biopsy of a pancreas, to do a pancreas biopsy, you actually have to do a surgery because you have to cut through the stomach to get to the pancreas. So in discussions, of course, with the medical team, I felt like I'd been through a lot. And the question was, will the pathology change the plan? Like, if we do this biopsy, will it change what our plan is? And the answer was no. The answer, we were still going to do the Whipple. We were still going to do the surgery. We still needed to get the mass, the tumor out of there. So we made the decision that it wasn't worth putting my body through that extra round of surgery. So I felt really supported by the medical team that we made the decision not to do that because it wasn't going to change the plan. But, just having a baby and getting a second cancer diagnosis, it does again sort of give you this moment of pause. How do I have two different cancers? Everybody assured me there was no real possibility that they could be related or connected. I naively asked, will my chemo for my breast cancer treat my pancreas tumor? And they're like, no, that's not how this works. It's like, oh, okay. But these are just the things. I mean, I didn't know. I was like, will it be of any residual benefit? No, it's got to be much more targeted. And there was no chemo treatment. The only treatment for my pancreas was surgery. I do remember one of the folks on my medical team saying like, well, you don't have the bad kind of pancreas cancer, not like what Alex Trebek had. That didn't necessarily resonate with me. I was like, okay, I'm not sure that there's any good kind of pancreas cancer. So for me, that wasn't necessarily a strong motivator. The only reason we knew there was anything in my pancreas was because I had had all of these scans, but it's not causing you pain. Like, it would be really advanced to really start to cause things physically. So I think that's, of course, why they wanted to reassure me that it wasn't going to be as terrible as I maybe might be thinking. But yeah, it was a lot to handle, I had many moments where I was like, I kind of wish I wasn't so rare. Two rare cancers, got all these rare side effects. Like, I'd be okay not being so rare right now. But it also meant that people were really committed and dedicated to getting me the right care.
I would have asked the same question. I mean, I would have thought that chemo would address any form of cancer and that what you were doing to treat your breasts would also treat your pancreas. So I think it was a perfectly suitable question to ask. During your journey, how often did you think about your mortality?
That's a good question. I don't know. I thought about it a lot at the beginning because once we knew more details about the kind of breast cancer I had, there's a lot of people who do not survive the kind of breast cancer I had. And so I think I was aware that I could be one of them. But as I went through the journey, I did have that sort of mind shift of, I want to focus on what's going to keep cancer out of my body, what's going to not allow cancer to thrive. And so I think I thought less about my mortality, and actually even had a shift of, if my cancer does come back, we kept kind of getting signals in positive ways that my cancer was responding very well to the treatment. For example, even when I had my mastectomy, one of the things that was really incredible was I had 3 lymph nodes that had had cancer in them when they had biopsied prior to my treatment. And part of the reason that we did chemo first was to really ensure that the cancer was being killed before I had surgery. And while I was having surgery, they actually took samples, because they put these little tags in your lymph nodes, because when you go through chemo, if it's going to shrink things, they want to know which lymph nodes had cancer beforehand. They want to make sure that they're tracking that, they want to know that they're getting the right area. So they had put these little tags in those 3 lymph nodes that had cancer, and they took them out in surgery, biopsied them while I was still in surgery, to make a decision on how much of my lymph nodes they would need to remove. Would they need to remove a third of my lymph nodes? Would they only need to remove those 3 lymph nodes? And when they did that biopsy, those lymph nodes did not have any more cancer. So that was a good signal. So in the end, they only had to remove those 3 lymph nodes. That was the choice of the medical team. They didn't need to remove more lymph nodes. So we were getting some signals along the way that my cancer was responding really well. That was really where I think I had that mind shift of, okay, then if cancer does come back in my body, I'm doing all of these things to change the environment of my body, hopefully, in small little things that I was doing, and diet changes and various things. I think I'll have comfort in knowing that I've done everything that I could do to prevent cancer from thriving in my body. And some of that is also even just, how do I manage stress now? If mortality is in my future, I think I have an outlook now that I likely will not live to be 100. I may not live to be 80. If I lived to be 60, that would be amazing. In a way that I think, because I was at 38, facing like I might not live a year from now, I just have this, every year feels like a gift in a way that I absolutely know that it would not have felt like before. I think we all think, how long will I live? How long will I live and have a healthy life? And I don't know. I think I've had like significant shifts in that. Some of the research shows that the recurrence of my kind of breast cancer is most prevalent 15 to 20 years down the road. So it's not like I'm in the clear perfectly yet either. Again, the first 5 years are still risky, and still there's high risk of recurrence. So I think for me, it's a continuing to just focus on the things that are hopefully not going to allow cancer to come back, and maybe keep mortality a little bit further down the road than here and now.
I like the idea of having gratitude for the wellness that you're experiencing in the moment. And I often hear this from people that have gone through their own challenges with either disease, ailments, whatever. And they have this moment of just experiencing this daily gratitude of saying, I'm here, I'm alive, I'm really grateful, I'm happy. And it's encouraging for not only me to hear that, but it's a reminder, I think, to just everyone around you that we have to be grateful regardless of whether we have a disease or not. So thank you for saying that.
I think that's so much easier to say than it is to do, though. Like, my gosh, I would never, ever wish my journey on anybody. And yet, I think this is kind of like what shapes life. All of us are going to experience different things in different ways, different hardships, different health circumstances. But it's like hindsight is 2020. You can't really know until you've confronted something sometimes. And I think it's really important to remind ourselves to be grateful and to have gratitude for the lives that we live. And it's also hard. And I do feel grateful that I am living, and I'm living cancer-free right now. But sometimes I forget, and I think gratitude is a thing that we should all just practice better. And not just gratitude, but maybe just kindness, graciousness. I don't think most people try to enter a situation or make a decision because they're hoping for a bad outcome. I think most people do the best they have with the information they have at hand in that moment. And, my information now about my life is different because of my diagnosis. Thankfully, you have not had to experience cancer yourself. It doesn't mean you haven't had other things that I haven't experienced that have given you different moments of reflection. I think we saw a bit of this happening coming out of the pandemic a little bit. Just, I think everybody's sense of like their shoulders were up higher, people were just feeling like the weight of the world in a different way. There's a lot of things that are impacting our lives. And some of the first things to go or not go, but maybe we don't always have the capacity for in a really positive way is that empathy and is that kindness to each other. And I hope we can find a path back to that.
You mentioned your mastectomy earlier. I'm wondering how that surgery impacted you because breasts are often associated with femininity. So I just wanted to get your insights on the impact of it on you and how your attitude perhaps about it has changed or if it has at all in this moment.
That's a really good question. I think my attitude towards mastectomies, whether you have one or whether you have two, through my own journey, I came to realize they are so deeply personal and nobody can convince you one way or the other what's right for you and your body. And I explored all of the options, the plastic surgeons, the whole team to talk about whether reconstruction is possible, not possible. It all depends also on your treatment journey. There are so many factors that weigh into this. And for me, a big part of my decision to not have reconstructive surgery was because through a lot of the reading I had done and research and listening to other people's stories and experiences, I came to realize how many additional surgeries are required for reconstruction. It's not like one and done. It's not like they put in a new boob and there you go. It's a journey. It's a process. It's a weekly process. It is a process that's happening right after you start recovering from your surgery. And there was a conversation about they would need to take muscle from my back, which would be another surgery. And I'm not good in medical situations. And the idea, again, of more surgeries or complications that could come from other surgeries that were actually not related to my cancer, I got to this place that was really a non-starter for me. I just felt very strong in my conviction that that was not the choice for me. I know people who are the exact opposite, that they know from the beginning that it is the absolute right choice for them. And they're willing and want to go through those various stages for the outcomes of having their breasts repaired. And there's people that are really in the middle in the gray. They don't know one way or the other. And maybe they need more guidance or help kind of getting there. I think it's really about you knowing you and what is going to be the end for you. And I had, a number of people who weighed in one way or the other into the conversation with me and had strong opinions. I think I also read a lot about people's journeys who had made the decision to have reconstruction and then had, in many years, often later, reversed that decision and sort of what that journey had been like for them. Also, as part of the LGBTQ community, I think this notion of femininity is already a bit in flux and fluid in some ways, even in terms of my experience of it with close friends and people in my life, that I didn't feel like if I only had one breast or two, that was going to be any reflection of my femininity or not. It makes dressing a little bit harder. And there's this amazing not-for-profit organization that makes these things called knitted knockers. And so I love that every day one of my boobs is knitted and the other is just attached to my body. But I kind of joke about that. And I think for some people, that's not the approach that they want to take. But I didn't ever have this moment of questioning, is it going to affect my femininity? I think many people do go through that. I think for me, it was so much about the medical stuff. Like I didn't want to harm any other part of my body that didn't need to be dealt with because of cancer.
Did you feel a sense of loss though?
Oh yeah, totally. I still feel it sometimes. I think people still feel it even if they've had a reconstruction, because there's just so many things that it's not you. It's not how you were originally formed. I mean, I definitely go through waves. I definitely have moments of feeling the loss and also the gratitude. And I think anybody that has ever had a surgery that has changed their body can appreciate that you can still have loss years later, and you can be grateful. Two things can be true at once. You can be grateful and also be sad for what was.
How many rounds of chemo and radiation did you receive, and how long did it take for you to actually recover from the treatment?
I received 6 rounds of chemo every 3 weeks. And my radiation was actually a new protocol. I received radiation for 15 days at a higher dose than what would have typically been a 25-day radiation cycle. So those things happened. And one of the things that I learned, which I never knew, was that actually you're most tired from radiation 1 to 2 months after the radiation has been completed. That's when your body is actually going to feel the most tired. But I had really good advice from, I think it was my oncologist early on, that I asked, like, how long will it be before I'm recovered? How long? Those are the questions, like, how long will these things take, or whatever the case may be. And they basically said, if you take the day that you start your treatment to the day that you end treatment. So for me, in my mind, my ending of treatment was actually my ending of my pancreas surgery. Like once I'd had my pancreas surgery, that was sort of the end of that journey, because throughout that I'd had so many other things happening along the way. That journey was a year and a half. And so the idea that I could still have another year and a half post the end of that, that my body would need time to recover and heal, and even that my energy levels would come back, or my strength would come back in certain ways. And it's really interesting. I've definitely had moments where I'm like, okay, this is like how I existed before cancer. And then there are other moments where, I'm still maybe more tired than I was before cancer. And I don't know that that will ever, ever change. I think there's certain things that may never change. But having the timeline, which was long, also, again, it sort of gave me the grace to be okay when things weren't just coming back as quickly as I wanted or hoped, or even providing that context for family members or other people in my life. I think there's this really, of course, people expect you're going to be tired when you're in chemo, and they expect you're going to be tired when you're in radiation. Nobody expects 2 months down the road is when you're going to be way more tired than when you were actively going through the treatment. It's sort of like those invisible things that you don't really know about. And so it was helpful for me mentally to be prepared for that longer recovery journey of all of the things that need to keep healing in your body. Whatever the journey is, whether that's surgery or radiation or chemo, many people have one of those things, not all three of those things. Some people have all three things. Some people have more. They're all traumas to your body that your body needs to recover from, and that your body needs to heal from. It gave me grace, but it also gave me an approach that I could share that, I'm not sure that I'm up for that yet, or now, or that hike wore me out in a way that I might not have been worn out before, and it just still taking me time to kind of recover from certain things.
You were declared breast cancer free in July 2021. What did you do to commemorate that?
We had a little party on our lawn with all of our neighbors in a socially distanced way. It was really sweet. I got home from my last treatment, and it was also a wild moment because I was supposed to just have my treatment, and I had a number of these things kind of happen throughout the journey. And I don't know, these are like miraculous things to me. Like, my hair started growing back a week after I finished my last chemotherapy, but my chemotherapy had been every 3 weeks. Like, how did my body know that it could start growing back? My last infusion that I had a port inserted into my chest, which many cancer patients have. And after my last infusion that morning, I had a surgery scheduled for the next week for them to remove it. And it decided to self eject. So I had to have an emergency surgery because I could see my port through my skin. And so I think Leanne had planned this whole party and they had to keep delaying it. But all to say, I got home and it was wonderful. And we had a really fun party with the kids, and our oldest still talks about it.
In May 2022, you and the family decide to move to one of the most remote parts of Canada, Fogo Island, which is an island that sits just off of the northeast coast of the main island of Newfoundland. Why was it important for you and the family to go there? And how did it help in your recovery?
I think we had this moment, especially following my pancreas surgery, where we just felt as a family like if cancer didn't give us a moment of pause and reflection, I mean, if COVID didn't give us that moment, I think it gave lots of people in the world that moment. But if it didn't give us an opportunity to maybe shift and change and try something, then what was it all for? We loved our time living in Toronto. We really, really, really loved that. And then there's also moments where you maybe are drawn to, like, what if we lived somewhere way more remote? Like, could we exist there? You know, what could that mean for our family? And so, even before the pandemic, even before cancer, we sometimes had those moments. We always joked that there was no in between for us. It was either like in the city of Toronto or in the exact opposite. And coming out of that and really wanting to have really positive health and health journey, we really felt we wanted to be living on the water. And we love wild, rocky landscapes. And there was something quite appealing also about being on such a remote island like Fogo Island, where it just forced us to live a bit more slowly and a bit more simply. I'm not saying that people that live on Fogo Island live more slowly and more simply. People can live more slowly and simply wherever they live. But we just felt like that could be a big shift for us and our family, and grounding in the soil every day on the rocks, just being so deeply connected to nature was a really strong driving force for us coming out of this journey. We just felt so compelled to be living as closely to nature as we possibly could be. And so nothing like a remote island in Canada. And Fogo Island was a really wonderful place. It was just also a moment for me to release all of the stress of work in a really significant way, and release all of the stress of the cancer journey, and release all any of the big things that had been happening, COVID too. It just felt like it, if not now, when? And we're like, we're going to do this. We're going to move there. Could be forever. It might not be forever, but that's our intention, is that we're going to do this, and it'll be great for our kids and our family and our health, hopefully. And it was really special.
Well, you're back in Toronto. You are in a new role, Vice President of Major Gifts at Sick Kids Foundation. I'm wondering, having experienced cancer yourself, is there anything different about how you're approaching your role?
You're right. We are back in Toronto, just back in Toronto. I think as I approach this work and this new role and this new opportunity, one of the differences that I try really hard to embody and lean into is not sweating the small stuff and not focusing on the things that I can't control. In a role like this, you're going to be involved in making some big and hard decisions. And there's also going to be some big and hard decisions that are made by people more senior than you that you can't control. I want to approach this role for myself, but also for my team in a way that acknowledges that we need balance. I think when you work in an organization that's a very high performing organization, you can always feel like there's more to do, which there always is. But how do you also ensure the health and wellness of your team? And how do you take that time amongst the drive to be able to acknowledge that we don't really want any of us to be working in a super high stress environment all the time? That's not going to be healthy for any of us. And it's not going to be healthy for the work that we're trying to do. And it's not actually going to help us reach the goals that we have that are really, really exciting and ambitious. And I also think I have a different perspective in terms of what patients and families are really going through because of my own personal experience and what my own family and I went through, that I hope I can bring to the team and to the relationships that we have at the hospital, that just ensures that we're always being empathetic to what people could be going through. We do this really well at Sick Kids, and I think we just continue to have an opportunity to do it even better. And I also hope for some people that it's in some ways can provide some inspiration. And so I hope that those are some of the things that I can bring to this work and in this role.
According to the Government of Canada website, and this is based on 2022 stats, 1 in 8 women will develop breast cancer, and 1 in 34 will die from it. And more broadly, and this is from 2021 stats, 2 in 5 Canadians will be diagnosed with cancer, and 1 in 4 will die from it. When you listen to these stats, what comes to mind? What do you think about? And then also, what advice do you have for people going through cancer or another life-threatening illness?
I think the statistics are scary. I've even heard that the statistics globally are now 1 in 2 people will be diagnosed with cancer. It means more and more people are going to have a cancer diagnosis, and more people are going to have a journey. And treatments are developing rapidly in some areas of cancer and not as rapidly in other areas of cancer. And I think we as a society need to take a moment of pause and really think deeply about our environment, what we put in our bodies, what we surround our bodies with, because I am not a medical doctor, so I cannot comment on this from medical research. But as a human, I just can't believe that it can only be attributed to genetics, the rise in cancer. I think there are a lot of other things going on around us. And I think we can't just sit here and think that it's genetics. I think we do need to start to question everything kind of around us and play an active role in changing that for ourselves, especially for the little people in our lives, the children. I mean, cancer rates are increasing. The fastest rates of cancer increasing is in children and youth and young adults. So that's scary because these are little bodies that are being impacted by so many things. And if we don't take a really hard look at that, I think that we're going to be, it's just going to keep going up. And that's going to be really, really tragic and sad. When I think about other people going through their own cancer journey or another life altering experience, whatever the case may be, I think my biggest advice would be to be kind to yourself and to acknowledge that it's going to be a roller coaster of emotions, and actually nobody else can tell you how to feel or respond. And I think if there's a way to find a path to positivity, that will benefit you in your journey, but that's not going to happen for everybody in the same way. And I think I say that from my own experience. I found something that I felt I could focus on that really shifted how I was thinking about my journey into a way that was forward looking. And that really worked for me. It might not work for everybody, but I do think the power of not positivity, but just, it's so easy to be negative, and it's so easy to be stuck in the sadness of it, that, you know, if you can embrace laughter instead of crying at times, that will be positive. I think if there's ways that you can focus on a future, whatever that future could be, even if it's a future that has cancer in it or something else, you know, and finding a path to that future, I think that will be the best way forward. I don't feel like I have lots of good advice in this respect, because I do think it is so personal. But if you're lucky enough to have really wonderful and supportive friends and family around you, I think that's really, really powerful and important, because you're not going to be on this journey on your own. I remember a friend who would just send me a message like, "How are you?" Nothing more, but quite regularly. And sometimes I was able to respond. I didn't always have the energy to respond. And that was just so powerful. So I try to think about how do we infuse those kinds of things into our life. It doesn't have to be related to anybody's health outcomes. It could just be, checking in on people. You never know what people are going through. The more that we learn about each other, we realize that everybody's going through something.
What does resilience mean to you?
I thought about this a lot. I think resilience for me is the journey. And I think that it's easy to be stuck in a place. And I think that I feel resilient because I've come through this journey. And I don't know that it ever ends, actually. There's always things that are coming up as part of that. But I think it's the continuing to move forward for me is a bit of resilience. And that you aren't defined by whatever your diagnosis was or whatever you're going through. I think that you can change that path. And I think we're all resilient in many different ways. I also think that resilience comes from being kind to yourself and acknowledging that you don't always know the answer, or you're not always going to make the right decision, maybe, or it's not always going to be the outcome that you want. And yet, if you're still moving forward, I think it's a positive thing.
How can people reach you if they want to contact you?
Well, you can definitely reach me on LinkedIn. You can just look me up under Nancy Horvath. You can also reach me on my email, nancy.horvath@sickkidsfoundation.com. If this has inspired you in some way that you want to connect, please don't hesitate to do that.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your personal experience, your journey through cancer, and your recovery. I know that your voice will help a lot of people. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Fabio, for inviting me and encouraging me to be part of this.
Thank you for listening to The Stumbling Spirit, Contemplations on the Path of Resilience. This is Fabio da Silva Fernandez. Join me again next week for another episode of transformative stories and beneficial practices to guide you on your wellness journey. If you wish, you can follow and DM me on Instagram at The Stumbling Spirit. Until next time, take a deep breath and another step forward on your path of resilience.